Welcome to Discovering. Tonight we have a lot to talk about, and mostly about fish. With the mild winter that we had, what effects might that have on our fisheries here in the UP? Plus we have some steelhead action, I have your smelt report from across the Lake Superior shoreline, and a few new fishing regulations to look out for. Plus we take a quick look at a new youth trap shooting program here in the UP. So sit back and relax, it's Monday night and it's time for Upper Michigan's very own Discovering.
The secret streams that flow beneath the cliffs of colored stone, forests thick and healthy with birch and pine and oak, surrounded by the greatest lakes this world has ever known. The black bear's awesome presence as he roams the hills and fields, call of the timber wolf, the loon's lonesome trill, the eagle soaring high above, the trout lies deep and still. These are what I treasure, the only way I measure feelings that I have for this fine land. There is so much to discover when you're a long-time lover of northern Michigan.
As we all know, this past winter was unusual to say the least, with a lack of snow and temperatures way above the average. The Great Lakes had little to no ice, and inland lakes varied, with some not having enough ice to safely fish, and others that had just enough to get out there for a short season compared to most years. Lakes froze, opened back up, and froze again, and few brave souls ventured out to scratch that itch to drop a line under the ice. I personally got out to ice fish for walleyes just a handful of times. With the camera, I believe I was out on the ice 5 times. It was a pretty odd season. With this abnormal UP winter and lack of ice and low water levels, I wanted to know what impact that may or may not have on our fisheries, both inland and on Lake Superior. Would it have a positive effect or a negative effect? For answers, I spoke to David Carafino, the new DNR Lake Superior Basin Coordinator.
We're standing here in Lawrence, right next to Lake Superior. Lake Superior water levels are down. They're down about 18 inches from where we were last year, but we're pretty close to our long-term average. So we're not used to seeing water levels here, but we're not in a low water situation yet in Lake Superior.
And what about our inland waters?
A lot of our water levels are quite a bit down. We'll see what the spring brings for precipitation. That snowfall we had a couple weeks back did make a difference as we were spinning through here. Marquette, the Carp River is up quite a bit from what it was a week or two ago, and the spring precipitation will probably help buffer some of that lack of snowfall we had this past winter.
With the lack of ice and anglers unable to get out on a lot of lakes, that was actually good news if you were a fish, and there should be more fish in the lakes for the spring season.
So on the inland side of things, one of the things that we'll notice is there will be less harvest, right? The ice just wasn't safe. It came on to the lakes late. It left early in a lot of cases. So there wouldn't be as much harvest through the ice this year. So that's something to kind of keep in mind. That was a bit of a relief for the fish. The other thing we sometimes see is winter kill. Winter kill typically happens when ice stays on the lakes for a very long period of time and the fish use up the oxygen that's in the lake. We probably aren't going to see very much of that this year because we just didn't have the ice cover for the duration to have those oxygen limitations. So we probably will see fish populations that were there in the fall do a little bit better through the course of this winter because of those conditions.
The lack of ice on Lake Superior, though, is potentially bad news if you were an egg spawned last fall.
In Lake Superior, the lack of ice cover was huge this year. I think we had 2 or 3% ice cover was our peak, which is far below what we're used to. And the benefits of ice cover on Lake Superior are to provide protection for fish that spawn in the fall. Their eggs, as they settle down into those reefs, that the ice cover keeps the currents and kind of keeps them from getting beat up by the wind and the waves. Not having that ice cover probably means that we're not going to have great survival of those eggs, lake trout eggs, whitefish eggs, that were spawned last fall. So this spring, we're not expecting to see as good a survival of those species from this particular year class. Lake Michigan will probably be the same thing. We typically don't get as high of ice cover in Lake Michigan, but the same principles hold true. Yeah, if we do have that ice cover, we would expect to see maybe a little bit better survival of some of those species, but we didn't have that ice cover, so we probably won't see that. In the Bays to Nock, we didn't have as long of an ice fishing season, so some of the benefits we might be seeing to fish populations in the inland lakes from not being harvested as much, we'll probably see that same thing from the Little Bay to Nock fisheries as well.
A big thing the DNR is keeping an eye on this year is how the early ice-off will affect walleye spawning and survival of those eggs.
The one thing that we're keeping an eye on, particularly for inland lakes, as usually we do walleye surveys in the spring right after ice out. And we've had really a goofy year because we had 80-degree temps in February that just killed our ice, and we had ice out extraordinarily early. So it's a little bit unclear how well walleye spawning will occur this year, if the fish are actually going to be able to deposit eggs that hatch and then survive. We saw fish really push shallow as soon as the ice broke up, but that was a month or more earlier than usual. And fish don't just use water temperature and lack of ice cover for spawning. Daylight and photo period matters as well. So the fish weren't quite ready to spawn when conditions said maybe they should be ready to spawn. So we're going to monitor walleye populations, and it'll be interesting this fall when we do our fall surveys, which are really what helps us understand how well fish survived from the previous spring spawning period. So we'll be looking to see this fall how well the walleye actually reproduced this year. One example, we did a walleye survey on Milicokia Lake in the UP in March, which is a solid month before it should have gone off. We were able to complete the survey, and then the lake refroze, which is unheard of. We went back after the lake thawed, so the second ice out, and did another recapture survey, and it was just as if we had continued a normal survey. We caught fish as we were expecting. So that protracted spawning period is very different than what we normally see from walleye. As soon as the ice goes out in a normal spring, you'd start to see water temps warm pretty rapidly, and that's kind of that trigger where if you have a fairly normal ice out period, the water starts to warm, that gets the fish going, and we'll complete a survey usually in like a 7 to 8 day period. Now what we're seeing is a little bit different because the spawning period is lasting longer, and usually you see males first and then females will come right when they're ready to spawn. On some of our surveys this year, that early push of a lot of male fish isn't really showing up the way that we've seen in the past. So how the males and females are interacting on the spawning ground seems to be a little bit different this year. And we've seen that in multiple lakes. We'll find out this fall when we do our fall surveys to see how successful they were. As long as males and females find each other, it may not matter, but you know, fish are picky, they're finicky, they're very specific to cue in on certain things. So if the males are cued in on something a little different than the females, the timing might not be quite right. So we'll find out. That's why we do surveys in the fall as well.
This isn't true of every UP lake, as some were surprisingly still ice covered in mid-April.
Teal Lake by Marquette, right? That still has ice on it as of today. Like Torch Lake in the Keweenaw still has ice on it for today. Those lakes this year is going to be no different than any other year because the ice will go off in mid-April and things will progress as they do. It's those lakes that had the ice go out in early March. Those are the ones that we're a little more concerned about because things are going to be working a little bit differently in terms of fish behavior this year.
With the early ice out on some lakes and warmer weather, how could that affect the walleye opener?
It's going to depend on the location you are, right? Some of those water bodies that had the ice go out in March and it never formed again and they've been gradually warming up, you'll see the fish not in their typical spring patterns because the ice will have been gone for 2 months. So depending on what happens right over the next month, if we get 80 or if we get 40, that could change patterns. But you know, right now as you move towards May 15th with the warmer temps and the early ice out, May 15th might be looking more like early June in terms of, you know, fishing and where the fish could be, and maybe not necessarily looking for those same spring patterns you would expect if the ice goes out late April, early May.
David says they don't expect the water levels to have a huge impact on spawning fish this spring. We did get that late winter snow, plus we've had a little bit of spring rain to now help us out. These steelhead anglers I caught up with a week ago also said there is still plenty of water for the spawning steelhead, even though this is the lowest they've seen this river in many years. With this low water level, they were actually able to get out on the river a couple of weeks earlier than usual and hit the early spawn instead of just the tail end of it.
Well, there you go.
While I was there, they hooked a ton of fish, but it was tough landing in that raging water and the rocks, and all but two got away. Chad had a good stretch, and it seemed like he had a strike every cast he made. A few were close, and they landed, of course, a handful before I got there with the camera. I was told that bright silver shows that they have only been in the river for a couple of days, and the longer they're in the river, the darker they get. And these smaller steelhead run upriver first to spawn, and it's usually the larger fish that come in later. We didn't do much talking on camera because that water crashing through the spillway was extremely loud. But thanks to Dave, and Chad for letting me spend a few hours with you for a great day of fishing. It has felt like spring for months now since we really didn't have a winter, and folks have been checking the Lake Superior tributaries daily for smelt for the last few weeks. It's been a will or won't they run early guessing game, and it sounds like it is indeed early.
Again, this is one of those where you've got a goofy spring. Some places didn't have any snowmelt, no snowpacks. You didn't have high runoff. Temperatures are going to be different in different places, and that runoff and those cues that the smelt kind of chime in on to go up the river, they're not going to be the same this year. And so a couple spots, folks have been saying it's 2, it's 3, it's 5 a night, and they're just not seeing the big pushes like they've seen. So I think we're going to see more of a drawn out smelt run this year as opposed to everything piling in at one time like we sometimes see in a typical year.
So perhaps we might have an early yet extended smelt season. Here are some of the reports I gathered across the Superior shoreline. People caught smelt on the east side of the UP as early as mid-March, and it sounds like the East End smelt season has come to an end, with people catching limits last week. The Munising Bay area pushed last week with people catching about a gallon an hour on warmer nights and has now reportedly slowed down too. The Keweenaw Bay area began seeing smelt staging in the bay the second week of April and in the rivers last week with reports of bucketfuls early in the week and 1 to 2 smelt per scoop on Thursday evening and night. As of Saturday, there were no smelt to report west of the Keweenaw Peninsula, so they might not have started running there yet. This year brings only a few new fishing regulations to our lakes and streams.
The NRC passed new steelhead regulations last fall that are now in effect. So the 2 rivers in the UP that are impacted are the Whitefish River down in Delta County and then the Carp River up in Marquette County. The regulation there is that only 1 steelhead as part of the daily bag limit can be greater than 20 inches in length. So the regulations are in the guide. Refer to the guide to check out those specifics, but that's the new change. Only 1 fish over 20 inches for those rivers. There's another regulation change related to lake trout and splake that primarily impacts Lake Superior. There's obviously lake trout and splake populations in Lake Huron, northern part as well. But in Lake Superior now, the splake and lake trout bag limits are combined. So whether you're west of the Keweenaw and the bag limit is 3, or if you're east of the Keweenaw and the bag limit is 5, you can have those in any combination. So you could have up to 3 splake totally, or 3 lake trout, or any combination of the 2 if you're west of the Keweenaw, and you could have 5 splake if you're in Munising Bay and you happen to get into them. That's a change because before those were not combined. So that's the change now that provides more flexibility for anglers in figuring out how they want to make up their bag limit on days when they're successful.
I asked David why the NRC made that change.
The main reason is identification. It's challenging to tell a splake apart from a lake trout. I mean, some anglers will say they can do it every single day. Others, it's a challenge, right? So having those be together in combination just makes anglers not have to worry about a positive identification between one or the other. It's pretty easy to tell a splake or a lake trout from any other species that you probably would be catching in those areas, but that was the main reason.
Additional regulation changes that start this year are for inland fishing guides.
There is a new requirement for folks if you are going to be acting as a guide on inland waters, and we're kind of defining inland waters as you kind of draw a line bank to bank on a river as you're, on the shoreline of the Great Lakes. Anything inland from that, rivers, streams, lakes, anything larger than 5 acres on a pond, basically. If you're going to be taking people fishing and they're compensating you for that, you're acting as an inland guide. You have to have an inland guide license now. The legislature passed that law last year. So Fisheries Division has been working with other divisions in order to implement that. So there is an application system now that folks can find online to apply to receive their inland guide license. There's certain requirements that need to be met. Then they can purchase that license. When you act as an inland guide, that comes along with a reporting requirement. You have to report to the department what you have caught while you were guiding, what your clients have caught. Those reports are monthly. They're all done electronically through the same system that we've used for electronic reporting for commercial fishers, charter captains, and wholesalers as well.
And what brought that about?
That's something that it's been discussed for a long period of time, that charter captains on the Great Lakes who take people fishing have to report on what's being caught. And we don't have a lot of inland creel data. We just don't have the funds to do inland creel. And so, we're kind of thinking, why is there 2 different requirements for if you're taking people fishing to have to report on what's being caught? There's also kind of a measure of safety there too, right? If somebody's going to take you fishing, you want to make sure that they meet certain safety standards. And so there's some safety requirements that are required of inland guides as well. So it's kind of bringing Great Lakes charter captains and inland guides, more kind of on the same playing field, so to speak.
Last month, when I visited the Negaunee Rod and Gun Club for a story about their expert youth shooter, I also talked to the club about their new youth trap shooting program they started up this year. Last year, there were only 3 sanctioned teams in the UP in the Michigan Scholastic Clay Target Program. Now, there's one more. The Mid-UP Clay Crushers.
We actually saw the episode on Discovering about a year ago that highlighted the teams from around the UP as they were competing in Manistee. And we had been trying to find a way of starting a team or a club here. And SCTP is the national organization that the other teams in the UP are affiliated with. So we decided to partner with them to be able to start a team.
Awesome. And how's it going?
It's going good. We've got 8 athletes that are competing right now. We're hoping to get a few more. There's 5 athletes per squad, and so we're trying to get 2 full squads of at least 10 kids. We could certainly take more than that, but right now 10 would be a good goal for us for our first year. And competitions will start in the next few weeks across the state, and they'll finish up with our district finals in June. And then the state finals are the last week of June. So we're hoping to still have some more practices. It's been a beautiful winter to be able to have these kids outside participating in shooting sports.
Awesome. Why should kids participate?
With shooting sports, you don't have to be the fastest on the field or the best with a ball in your hands. It gives an opportunity for students at all levels to participate. There's no bench warmers in this program, so everybody that's part of the team gets a chance to compete and to have the camaraderie and skill building. And I think that it provides another avenue for kids to be outside and enjoy the outdoors. So this is my son Wyatt, and he's been shooting with me just for fun for the last few years. And this is Jacob, and he's been shooting with his parents and his grandfather, who's a big part of our club here and has been shooting out here for years. And so they've got a strong interest in the club, but we have some students that have never participated in shooting sports, that this is really their first experience. And we have kids from all levels that are involved. It's challenging?
It's very hard. It's very challenging.
Had you shot trap before?
Before we had started, no. I had thought that it was going to be very similar to shooting something like skeet or sporting clays. But I got here and pulled out my gun, ready to go, and it was nothing like it. It was a total challenge and something completely new.
Definitely. A lot different than ski, where it's more side-to-side action. Just definitely a lot different.
We're just really excited to have so many kids involved and provide an opportunity for them to do something different and I'm really looking forward to the season ahead. We're going to host our own shoot here at the club. We may host 2, but we're hoping to at least have 1 where we invite teams from across the UP and below the bridge to come up and compete with us.
It makes me incredibly happy to hear that a story I did helped this club learn how they could also start their own youth trap shooting team. So good luck to the Mid-UP Clay Crushers, and I hope your program continues to grow. That's all for tonight, and I hope to see you right back here next week for Upper Michigan's very own Discovering.